This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 163 of the De Facto Leaders podcast. Preparing young people for adulthood is all about providing them with the right blend of experiences, both in and outside of school. Building literacy, numeracy, and content knowledge will give students a foundation for success, but we need to pair that with real-world experiences where they can apply that knowledge in real time. When we think about real-world experiences, we often think of internships, on-the-job skills, or daily tasks and other things we'd eventually categorize as adulting. However, outdoor excursions offer kids and young adults the opportunities to explore and experience things beyond the day-to-day. It's one thing to learn about water health and environmental studies in a classroom, but when you get the chance to do a multi-week excursion along the Hudson River and drink from a natural water source, you amplify your learning to a new level. That's why I invited Greg Morrissey to the De Facto Leaders podcast for episode 163. If you enjoy hiking, skiing, and other outdoor activities, you'll definitely want to listen to this entire episode. Trust me, you will thank me later. Greg Morrissey is an educator explorer and the founder of Mountain Goat Movement, an organization that provides transformative adventures for students while connecting them to leading explorers, educators, and storytellers. Projects can be as short as one day or as extensive as a multi-week expedition, everywhere from the Adirondacks to Antarctica. Greg has raised over $140,000 for students from low-income backgrounds to experience the power of the great outdoors. In this conversation, we discuss bringing traditional curriculum and content areas to authentic outdoor experiences and how to use excursions to help kids work as a team and form connections with peers. The concept of tiered expeditions, how we can offer different activities to support different levels of experience with the outdoors and nature, what habits and skills you can practice in daily life to prepare for a multi-day or multi-week adventure, and the behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to prepare for quality outdoor education, including what Greg is doing to raise funds for scholarships to increase equity. Before we get going, I wanted to remind you to check out the B Podcast Network for educators and aspiring leaders. If you're looking for shows to inspire you to level up in your career or more effectively serve students, we've got you covered. You can learn more about the B Podcast Network at bpodcastnetwork.com. Now, please enjoy this interview with Greg Morrissey. Today, I am joined by Greg Morrissey from Mountain Goat Movement. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much for having me on, Karen. I'm excited to speak with you and your listeners.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear all of your good stories because I know that you have a lot of them. So let's start off by having you share who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Greg Morrissey. I'm a seasoned educator and explorer. I founded an organization called Mountain Goat Movement, which provides transformative adventures for primarily high school and college students while connecting them to leading explorers, educators, conservationists, and storytellers.
Great. Well, so I know that there's so much that we can get into from what you just mentioned. So I know that you started off as a teacher and then transitioned to doing the work that you're doing now. Like, what made you decide to do this?
It's a great question. So I taught high school literature for 9 years at an all-boys school in Jersey City, New Jersey, a place where the outdoors are often an afterthought. And outside of my teaching career, I've always had, a deep passion for the outdoors and movement and health and wellness. And so I started the school's outdoor education program. And what started as a small program in which I would bring, 4 or 5 students outside for a local hike or a ski trip evolved into something that became very meaningful in the school's programming. So over the course of my 9 years teaching at St. Peter's, I led about 1,200 students across various outdoor projects and experiences, everywhere from our backyard in New Jersey down the Jersey Shore to Peru, Costa Rica, all over. And what happened during this time period is I would spend my summers off as a teacher doing my own personal expeditions with the hopes of raising money for low-income students to ultimately participate on study abroad programs and adventure programs. So, for example, one summer as a teacher, a colleague of mine and I completed a cycling trip from Canada to Mexico over 30 days. We were able to receive sponsorship from outdoor brands like Cliff Bar. And what we did with that project is we advocated for the importance of outdoor education and experiential learning. We were very fortunate to raise $40,000, and that $40,000 went on to fund 15 students from low-income, disadvantaged backgrounds to go to places like Peru, Costa Rica, Vermont, the Adirondacks, and learn skills in the outdoors through these various adventures. So that idea inspired me and informed what I do now, which is I left my teaching career in 2022 to create Mountain Goat Movement. So the very premise from what I did at St. Peter's is to provide these transformative adventures and experiential learning initiatives to high school and college students, building out meaningful curriculum that aligns with a school's humanities program or a science program, connect students and serve as a bridge between the student and an explorer, a conservationist, a storyteller. In short, what I do primarily is education through adventure.
Great. Yeah, I have so many questions. I think so. I definitely want to hear about the fundraising, but since you were just talking about tying the curriculum into other experiences outside school, I know that there's a lot of conversation about, okay, what should we be providing kids in school? What kind of experiences can we give kids? And there's the traditional curriculum aspect. Of course, we need to focus on things like reading and writing, and then there's the other content areas as well. And we want to continue to have that, but that can only take us so far. And then we actually need to go out and have experiences. So what does that look like for you as far as taking what's being done in school and then just amplifying it through experiences? Can you give some examples of ways that you've partnered with schools and figured out ways to pull the curriculum into something that you've done with kids?
That's a great question. So there's one particular trip that I think best represents what I do. So
Mm-hmm.
in July of 2023, I led 8 high school students on a human-powered expedition of the Hudson River. So the Hudson River is 315 miles long. It runs from a little bit south of Canada in the Adirondack region to Jersey City, where it empties out into the Atlantic Ocean. And the river, what's amazing about that river in particular is you go through so many different aspects of New York, from the rural and the remote all the way to, New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So that project, I connected with an environmental policy director named Dr. Joseph Dady, who's up in the Adirondacks and runs an organization called Hamlets to Huts, and Dr. Tim Keyes, who's a data scientist at a Sacred Heart in Wake Forest. And so what we did was we had the adventure piece for these students. And the adventure piece was these guys actually over 400 miles, hiked, cycled, camped, even inner tubed one day all the way from the river source point to the sea. And
Wow.
along the way, we built out this scientific programming where the students collected 25 samples with Dr. Tim Keyes and looked at microplastic levels of the Hudson River. We then helped them produce a citizen science paper looking at the general health of the river. And we also had another individual who's a part of this niche education exploration space named John Barnhart, who's an Emmy-winning filmmaker and professor out of Colorado State. He joined us with his team, and we're actually finalizing a documentary on the importance of experiential learning called The Voice of the Hudson. And so the reason why I bring that trip up in particular is because it hits on every touch point for Mountain Goat. So you have the
Hmm.
adventure piece, the curriculum piece, which for this project in particular, it was the scientific sampling and then the storytelling piece. Um, and then, we have the mentoring piece. So the 8
Hmm.
students on this trip got to connect with 4 leaders of different backgrounds. So you have environmental policy director, data scientists, myself as a literature teacher and adventure guide, John Barnhart as a filmmaker and storyteller. Um, in regards to the skills that I think were learned over this trip, you have soft skills, which I think are just as important as hard skills. So
Yeah. Hmm.
this, the environment that was like curated from this trip prompted the students to be resourceful, self-sufficient, gritty. Um, we were all totally pulled out of our comfort zones.
Yeah.
So, we had students on this trip who were well versed in the outdoors, and, some of them were Eagle Scouts, and, a trip like this is familiar to them. And then we had a couple students who had never been in a tent, who had never
Wow.
spent time
That's
on a
a
mountain.
For your first trip, that's pretty intense.
It was very intense, and
Yeah.
we had students from all over the country, so this was an application-based trip. We were so fortunate to have a great group. Most of these guys had never met each other before, and some of the days were very long and challenging. I mean, there was one
Yeah.
day in particular where we spent 18 hours hiking. That was actually our first day.
Wow.
Uh, Very difficult.
Rip the Band-Aid off, right?
Yeah, yes. And, of course, like not every mountain goat trip is like that at all. Like we have a
Hmm.
lot of beginners, but that was the first day of a 15-day trip. And so, for a moment like that, like the guys either have to really come together and bond, or, the trip is ruined. And so we
Yeah.
were lucky that we had such a great group of students that they found the positive in the challenge, and they really bonded over this trip. And I hope that this trip inspires them to be lifelong friends. Um, so that trip in particular is um, probably one of the most serious things that I've ever done with students. Um, we do a lot of events. We do a lot of one day hiking, surfing, trekking, skiing type
Hmm.
of activities. And then, we find little touch points where we can build out um, hard skills, which would be connecting with like explorers, conservationists, scientists, and then the soft skill piece, which, like I said, I think is just as important. We're trying to curate environments that inspire resiliency, self-sufficiency, teamwork, aspects that maybe the classroom can't always provide.
Hmm.
And I think what's really special about bringing students out into the natural world is that, it's not like with sports, you have students who hone in on basketball and that's their thing. You have students who join theater groups and that's their thing. I think with the natural world and some of these activities, we're able to bring students together of every different interest and background.
Hmm.
Of course, there are a number of students who are captains of their varsity team. And then there are kids who, are a bit more introverted and they're looking for that thing. And maybe the outdoors is that thing. Um,
Hmm.
it's a really beautiful thing when you see these different personalities come together in adverse but beautiful environments.
Yeah. I have a couple things that I'm thinking of there. And, I definitely uh, enjoy a lot of these outdoor activities. And my husband and I have done some of the multi-day hiking trips, which takes a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, but we didn't start there. We started off with like, the day trip. the hiking trip and we worked up, and then we did the weekend trip where we camped one night, and then we did the 4 to 5 day section hike. So we
Yes.
did it in stages. And I know that there are certain people who are interested in those types of things, but the Hudson River adventure would be overwhelming to them. So what do some of those beginner trips look like to help people experience that in a way that lets them kind of dip their toes in?
Yeah, so I try to tier everything as much as possible. So, a good story that comes to mind is even though Mountain Goat was formalized in 2022, I've been doing this work with students for about 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, one story that comes to mind is I worked with a group of freshmen, and we went up Mount Marcy, which is the highest point in New York. It's a challenging first hike. It requires about 6 to 8 hours of hiking. It's the highest point in New York, so it's attractive to young people because it really gives them that feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah.
And so, this was 5 years ago. I brought up a group of freshmen, and there was one guy in particular who was lagging in the back, and it was his first hike ever. He didn't really enjoy it. He couldn't make sense of it. It was,
Yeah.
and I spent
Did
the
he do
bulk.
sports or anything?
He
Was he an
actually, so
athlete?
he was a hockey player.
Okay, so he had
Yeah,
some endurance.
he had a background in athletics, but didn't really have any outdoor experience,
Yeah, that's a
which is
different
typically how it
thing.
starts. Yes, and so he actually hated that first hike. And I think some of these things might be labeled as like type 2 fun, where in the moment you don't love it, but after the fact you realize how special of an
Oh
activity
yeah, I
it was.
love that. That's so
Yeah.
true. I can think of so many things where I was not happy, but then looking back, it's like that's the thing you remember and that you tell people about.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So that's exactly what happened to him.
That's
And
cool.
so freshman year does Mount Marcy, doesn't like it, hates it. And then it was funny, a few weeks after that hike, he reached out and he was like, "When's the next thing?" And I was like, "Oh, wow." And so we did the next quote unquote thing. We went skiing up in Vermont and he learned how to ski. And ultimately, he fell in love with the outdoors, and by the end of his junior year, he decided to join a trip with his buddies where we went to Kilimanjaro. And Kilimanjaro, is the Penn ultimate experience for a lot of everyday hikers and outdoor enthusiasts. It's
Hmm.
a 7 day trek typically through all 4 seasons, 5 ecological zones. It's the highest point in Africa. It's definitely an accomplishment. And so we went up Kilimanjaro, and this student who 3 years prior hated his first hike summited Kilimanjaro before graduating high school.
Wow.
And that whole trip and that whole process kind of inspired him to, of course, spend more time in the outdoors and find the beauty in it. But it also helped him figure out who he was. And, for that student in particular, he decided to take a gap year and work, not go to college, figure out what he really wants. He took a path that worked best for him. And, in his own words, that process informed him and allowed him to kind of be autonomous in this decision making because he had a number of experiences that prompt him to be self-sufficient, come out of his comfort zone, learn about his personhood a bit more intimately than perhaps just a classroom could provide.
Hmm.
And I think that that's a really good story in terms of tiering programs so that
Yeah.
I think what's most important with Mountain Goat is like whenever we do a trip, an event, something, I want to try to curate a love of that thing. And so I work with a lot of students, being that, I'm based in New Jersey. I work with a lot of students from the larger New York City metropolitan area, students who aren't necessarily familiar with the outdoors. And so I have to be very mindful and intentional about how I try to inspire them to fall in love with this stuff. Um, I think there are other touch points where I'll work with schools to try to, empower students in thinking about these things. One of the one of the initiatives that I've been actively working on as a former literature teacher. I believe in the power of storytelling. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and interestingly enough, my first year teaching, I taught the Odyssey, which is the ultimate adventure story.
Yeah.
You know, in a high school literature classroom, we so often speak about the hero's journey and that framework coined by Joseph Campbell. I'm actually my family's from Greece. And bizarrely enough, my grandfather and his family are from the island of Ithaca, which is the island where Odysseus set sail from. And Ithaca represents this place of home and this place of comfort. And Odysseus has to leave and have this epic quest and adventure only to come back and be a better servant and community member for his home island. And so what I'll do is I'll go to high schools and colleges and I'll recount the hero's journey, and I'll talk about the critical need for all young people to go out and have this adventure, whatever it may look like, to go into this place of discomfort and challenge, where they have to be resourceful and self-sufficient, and they have to rely on their own savviness and curiosity to be successful, because it's through those trips and experiences that ultimately allow us to come back into our communities, into our schools, and become valued servants of that community, because we have to step away from our home to be able to really understand who we are as people and how we can be of value to others in our life.
Yeah. I love that how it's not always about like you need to leave permanently. It's just about the experience and the learning.
Yes.
S-
And I think we joked before, like, I think a lot of this stuff is type 2 fun, like the Hudson
mhm.
River trip. Not every moment is enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was challenging for adults. It was challenging for everyone. We all had that moment where we were like, why are we doing this? What's the point of this? But then I think with a lot of these programs, at least the more difficult programs, like even a Kilimanjaro, it's not until after the fact that you realize how important and significant of a thing that you've done, and you have that experience with you forever. So that when you're back home in your everyday life, whether it's work or school, um, and you're having a bad day, like that you can get through a bad day because
Hmm.
you've been able to do that in more of a harsh, perhaps, environment than just being at home.
Yeah. It reminds me of something that one of my college professors used to say where because he was a runner. He also was a stutterer. He taught the stuttering course. And interestingly enough, I took another one of his courses and I had no idea that he stuttered because he did so much work to make sure that he could speak clearly when he wanted to and use his strategies and feel
Mm.
confident with them. And so yeah, whenever I think about resilience, he's one of the people I think of. But he also was a runner, and he said that people would ask him, "Why do you like running so much?" And he said, "Because it feels so good to stop running."
Mm.
So I always think about that where I mean, I run about 6 days a week, and I don't always feel like it. I typically don't feel like it. I don't want to get up out of bed in the morning, but it's it's kind of the satisfaction. There's a lot of things that I do that I don't look forward to, but I keep doing it. And then I'm excited about doing it. And then in the moment, it's like, I don't feel like doing this. So I think that that's something that's really important because there's sort of this tendency to like if kids are saying they're bored or it's hard or they're showing some kind of displeasure with what they're doing, it's like, oh, we don't want to do that because we're gonna you know uh, push them too hard, or and obviously you want to be mindful of it and do things in a tiered approach as you said, but I think there is something to be said for showing kids that just because you're feeling something in the moment doesn't mean that you have to give it so much meaning, or it doesn't mean that you need to stop what you're doing immediately, that it's okay to sit with it and it's fine, it's going to pass, and just to have that experience. So on that
Absolutely.
note, so I have a couple questions that I was thinking about. So I guess my first question is you just as the adult who's curating this experience for kids, I mean, I know teachers that are, it's overwhelming to plan a field trip where you're going to go to the zoo for the afternoon. I know that that is a lot of work. So I can't imagine what this is like. And I mean, so what from the planning end on your part, what are you thinking about? And then how are you planning and helping to prepare the kids for what they're about to experience? Because I'm sure that there's a lot of planning and preparation you have to do for them to help them understand what to expect, just some strategy and thinking through things and problem solving, which of course a lot of that they're going to experience when you're out doing whatever it is you're doing. But what do you do at the beginning to prepare for that? And then is there some sort of, like, we went out and we had this expedition today and then we're kind of reviewing what happened? How does that look for you?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you recognizing that reality because
Yeah.
it's funny. In 2 weeks' time, I'll be bringing 40 students up to Killington, Vermont, and all the kids see is, the fun part, the skiing, the good
Yeah.
food, the giveaways, all that, but they have no idea that it took a year to get to that point.
Yeah.
um,
That's just how it always is. It's like, no, we just,
yeah. Yes. No, absolutely. So, I think so with Mountain Goat, this is grassroots and bootstrapped. And what I'm very grateful to have and what allows me to think critically about the logistics behind every project and event is we have an ambassador program. So the ambassador program houses students at the high school and college level, explorers, folks who are part of National Geographic, and then there's an organization here in New York called the Explorers Club, and then educators. So when I'm thinking about a trip that might resonate with, what's being taught in schools, I often turn to this ambassador program. I'll ask principals for feedback, students, and I'll try to find a marriage that works kind of for everyone. Um, it can be quite difficult in choosing trips and events that really work well. I've definitely had a number of trips where I thought they would be really successful and schools and students would want to get on board and then nothing comes of it. And then all
Mhm.
that planning, all that work um, is not necessarily in vain, but it informs me that, okay, this doesn't work. Um, so the Hudson River project, as an example, that was an ongoing conversation for about 3 years.
Mhm.
And a lot of these ideas stem from curiosity, which we mentioned skills before. I don't know if there's anything more powerful that we can do for our students than inspire curiosity within them for young people to drum up ideas of meaning and value and not just have these ideas as ideas, but pursue them with intense passion and execution. So, as an example, the Hudson River trip all stemmed from curiosity. So, maybe 4 years ago, I brought a group of students up to the Adirondacks from the New Jersey area. It's about 4.5 hours north, which the Adirondacks is actually the largest protected park in the continental US. And we brought up a group of students. We were sitting on the back porch, Dr. Joseph Dady's back porch, environmental policy director. And we were just thinking, man, like, there's got to be more adventure than what we can see in the New Jersey, New York area. Like, there's
Mhm.
got to be these places that we often overlook. And that's when we thought about the Hudson River. Is it possible to go from the river's source point to the sea? And that idea, that moment of curiosity, was all just a conversation on a back porch with a number of rising juniors and rising seniors. And then fast forward 4 years later, a year and a half of um, logistical work and a lot of back end and formulating an itinerary that didn't really exist, we were ultimately able to launch that project. And that project in particular hit on so many touch points that are relevant in curriculum right now. There's a lot of conversations around microplastic levels. So is
Mm-hmm.
there a way that we can show students how to analyze the health of the river, and look at these microplastics and see it firsthand and experience it? And with that project, what was really cool is we partnered with a water bottle company, Grail. They make water filters, and we use Grail water bottles for half the river. So these students were drinking from the river. So they were intimately aware of the river because they were experiencing it. And now that many of those students who are from the New York area, like, they look at their environment in a completely different lens.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with the outdoors, especially now, we have this alarmist, maybe doomsday approach around the status of the environment. But for the Hudson River in particular, what's very refreshing is that that river is the healthiest it's ever been over the last 10 years because of work done by various organizations like Riverkeeper and Billion Oysters Project. So again, it's that moment where we're able to objectively show students their own environment, how it informs their day-to-day life, and connect that to curriculum, all stemming from curiosity. Um, Another example, I alluded to this before. I'll have 40 students up in Killington, Vermont to ski and snowboard for a weekend. And, for a weekend like that, a 2-day trip, it's difficult to build out curriculum that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it's important to bring on mentors and leaders to teach the students something beyond just the activity. So for that weekend, for the skiing weekends, I'll loop in different partners. So this weekend in particular, we have a product engineer from Arc'teryx. They're an outdoor company like North Face, Patagonia. They build
Mm-hmm.
outdoor wear. And so we're doing a talk one of the nights where the product engineer is going to explain the science and engineering behind outdoor wear.
Oh,
And
cool.
hopefully that's a touch point where students who are interested in science and engineering can, look to this person as a mentor, or students who are interested in maybe like one day having a career in the outdoors, they can look to this person as a mentor. We have a professional skier from Chile who's also a drone pilot who's going to share his story in being a pro skier down in South America, moving to Killington, being a ski coach, learning how to fly drones, learning the English language in 2 years' time to be able to move to Vermont. Like, that's another touch point of inspiration that, has to be learned and realized in an environment like a ski resort or a mountain, can't necessarily be learned in a classroom. Um, so as much as I possibly can, I like having these ongoing conversations with students and educators alike to ensure that we're doing right by everyone, and that ultimately, just like in a classroom setting, it comes down to skills. Like when I taught The Catcher in the Rye to sophomores, many of those students, if they read the book in its entirety, are not going to remember The Catcher in the Rye in 20 years' time. But hopefully they'll learn how to, annotate a book correctly. Hopefully they'll understand how to, implement analysis when breaking down a quotation. So those skills can last a lifetime. So the same idea is applied to some of these trips. Is I try to first look, it's like backward design, like looking firstly at the skills, both soft and hard skills, and then ensuring that we can provide a trip or an event that inspires students to want to do these things, but maybe known or, even unbeknownst to them, they're leaving that weekend, that trip, that event, with skills that extend beyond the trip itself.
Yeah. I wanted to take a quick break here to bring your attention to some past episodes of the De Facto Leaders podcast that would really be a great supplement to this conversation. After Greg and I turned off the recording, we had a great conversation about balance, as well as how important it is to give kids a blend of work on academic skills, as well as real world skills and opportunities to explore. So I'm going to bring your attention to some episodes that will really give you a nice blend of all those different areas so we can really bring them together. So the first episode I want to mention is episode 123, Creating Equitable Systems for K-12 Math with Jonathan Regino, as well as episode 158, Literacy and Background Knowledge, Essential Skills for Life with Dr. Pamela Snow. Those are two episodes that cover some of the key foundational skills that we want to build in kids' academic experiences, which are reading and math. And then I also wanted to bring your attention to a bonus episode I did called Accessible Career Exploration in K-12 Education with Matthew Chaucy from CareerView XR. So what Matthew does is that he uses virtual reality experiences to give kids equitable opportunities to explore different career options. When we're thinking about giving kids access to a variety of different experiences, equity is a huge part of this conversation because there are many geographic areas where it's difficult to logistically provide kids with a variety of experiences. So Matthew is working to solve that problem, and he's using technology to do it. So what he is aiming to do is not replace real life experiences, but help to streamline and give kids a clear direction so that we can prioritize what kind of experiences that we want to create for kids in the real world. And then finally, I wanted to mention episode 144, Becoming a School Founder and Empowering Students Through Project-Based Learning with Tanya Sheckley. Again, this really goes hand in hand with the concept of experiential learning, and I think it will be a great supplement to this episode. Please check the show notes for links to all of those episodes. Now let's get back to the conversation. So I think that's interesting that you bring up all those different positions and different people, because I think that when kids are not able to go out and talk to people who are doing things, they don't understand what skills and preparation are required to do whatever it is. Like if you want to do what that professional was, you said skier or snowboarder, from Chile, like you had to learn a new language. That's a lot of work, and that's really hard to do. And I bet there were a lot of other things he had to do in order to be able to do all those different jobs. Or here's a skill set. Here's different ways you can use it. You can be, because a lot of people, it's like, what's your default thing that you wanted to be when you were a kid? Everybody wants to be a professional athlete. Now everybody wants to be a YouTuber or an influencer or a gamer. Well, right. Not everybody can do that. And the chances that you're going to be able to do that are very small, but there's lots of other options that you have if you have an affinity for something like that and you have an interest for that. Like there's other ways and there's other things that you can consider. And so I think just sometimes people don't know their options until they actually go out and explore without realizing that they're looking for something in particular. So I think that's really important because I know that, again, sometimes if you only have this limited range of experiences, you just don't really know what things you can possibly do. And when kids are that age group that you're working with, I really think that we need to start having conversations about the future and what are your options as early as freshman year, because they're getting a lot of outside influences, which may or may not be accurate, especially if they're not going out and having experiences. So the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking through all of that is, so obviously this kind of experience takes a lot of thought and a lot of conversations and networking to pull it together. But on the day of, you've done all the work, you've orchestrated this experience, and you have a group of students who are ready to go skiing for the weekend, for example. What kinds of things do you have to do on the day of to get them ready for that experience? Because I know what it was like for my parents taking us skiing. There's skiing with 4 little kids and all the equipment and everything. And we learned very quickly how to get all of our stuff together, because it's like, we're not carrying your skis for you. You've got to do it yourself. So there's a lot of just, as you said, other skills that you learn besides the actual activity that you're doing. And of course, you want to teach how to ski safely and all of that as well. But there's all those other things, the planning and getting your stuff together and the how to be, I mean, lift line etiquette or having to pay attention to your surroundings or pay attention to your group and keeping your group together. So how do you prepare the students that you're working with for those types of things that are they're not the main thing that people think about when you're doing the activity, but they're things that you have to know how to do in order to be able to enjoy it and also do it safely and successfully.
Yes, no, that's a great point. I think, knock on wood, but fortunately with the ski trips, they're pretty streamlined at this
Yeah.
point. Um, and so I mean, typically how it works is like, we'll have a 5-hour bus ride to a resort, and that's
Mhm.
kind of where we lay out the groundwork for
Okay.
expectations
So
and
there's
how.
built in, you can have a conversation there and that's
Yes,
good.
yeah.
A captive audience at that point.
Yes, yes. And then like when we're on the actual mountain, we'll divide students up into groups and they have some choice, and it's typically based on skill level. So if we're skiing Saturday and Sunday, we'll have the beginners with one group and they'll go with instructors, and we'll make sure that they're learning skills before they can go off on their own. Um, the students who are well versed in skiing and snowboarding, they'll be in their group and they'll go out, and then we'll like ski patrol at these mountains early to aware that we're present on the mountain. And then, I'll have at least one chaperone for every 10 students, and we have eyes on all of these students. Um, and a lot of different touch points. Like we'll have a group me where, we're constantly communicating on mountain. We'll check in at lunch. Um, and I think, you know, as I'm thinking about this answer, like I think a lot of it too is, even though it's on a resort and it's pretty confined and pretty well managed, it
Mm-hmm.
does come back to like being self-sufficient and savvy. Like, you know, these kids have to be self-aware enough to know that how they behave on the mountain and how they interact is not just going to affect the experience of others, but also themselves. Like,
Yeah.
um, and a lot of that comes from like you want to. I think I've been lucky enough where like most of these groups of students are really great kids, and they want to be outside. Like they want to be there. Like all these programs, like students and families want to be there. Like it's not like, you know, uh, little Timmy is forced to go to play soccer and he hates being there. And
Yeah.
so,
You can always tell where
yeah.
it's like they don't
Yeah.
really want to be there.
Yes.
But I
And I,
do think it's good. It's hopefully that's a tier two experience for some of those kids and they learn, to be confident.
yes, yes, exactly. So, for I guess first in and this is a great question, but I think my first response is like, 99% of kids who are on these trips want to be there. They're doing it by
Yeah.
choice. And
Hmm.
so they know that there's like a code of conduct, which
Yeah.
is a code of conduct that families sign, but there's a code of conduct to be followed. And ultimately, like they have to realize that their choices, we could talk forever to a 14-year-old about how their choices affect the lives of others. They don't really internalize that. But when they can be in an environment where they realize that their choices affect themselves, then they are a bit more eager to perhaps make the right choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and because where my head goes is that there's, if there are kids who do sometimes have a hard time, as you said, internalizing it or just remembering it and knowing how to apply it,
Yes.
if you are sitting there lecturing a 14-year-old about this is the way that you're supposed to act in a group and all of that, and then there's no follow-up and opportunity to immediately apply it, it's not going to stick with them. But if you're on the way to a trip and you're saying, okay, this is what's going to happen when we're there, and this is the code of conduct, this is how we're going to be safe, this is how you're going to be expect to communicate with your group, and then they can go immediately do it and participate in that activity that, as you said, is going to affect them, is going to affect other people, then then like you said, it's easier for them to see that connection. So,
Yeah.
and then you probably have the opportunity to talk about how it went on the way home. If you have the
Yeah.
5 hour, well, I don't know, is that a day trip or is that usually
Uh,
a weekend trip?
Typically we'll do like ski weekends. So
Yeah,
we'll
I was gonna
start.
say 5 hours is a long time to just go for
Yeah.
the day, but
Yeah, so we'll do 2 or 3 days, sometimes even four if there's a holiday break.
Yeah. So my
Um,
other question is that so I know that like you said, there's different tiers. And this is for selfish reasons as well as just, for all the listeners that there are when you have a something like this that does require more planning and time, even in obviously for the weekend, that is a little bit more manageable, but there are things that you can be doing and habits that you can be building in to your day to day that could probably prepare you for something like that. Parents can be doing things at home with kids, even people who are working with kids in schools, or I know that there are therapists who want to know how can they make suggestions to the teacher or to the parents. What are some daily habits that can be good that can potentially transfer over to something like one of your weekend trips or even one of your longer expeditions that would be, maybe a transferable skill that could help prime kids to be able to participate in more of those experiences aside from just doing the experience itself?
yes, that's a great question. One piece that comes to mind is Kilimanjaro's a fan favorite trip, and you know, I tell families like Kilimanjaro's earned, like you have to earn the opportunity to do a Kilimanjaro, and so that
Mm-hmm.
means that there's got to be 3 to 6 months of work in advance. And
Yep.
so for Kilimanjaro in particular, one of the things that we do with the kids is we have a very active like WhatsApp group where every week they have to wear their Kilimanjaro, the backpack that they're using for Kili, to go get groceries, to go get their everyday needs. And so
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like a very simple thing, but what's kind of cool about a young person doing that over the course of 6 months is they're now walking a lot more on a
Mm-hmm.
weekly basis. Um, they're now seeing their neighborhood in a different way. Like it's very easy to just overlook our neighborhoods because we're driving constantly. But when we're actually out and like walking and we're walking to Starbucks, to the grocery store, like we're able to be much more in tune with our environment on a day-to-day basis. And so the process of Kili in many ways is more transformative than the mountain itself because through this process, students are getting used to good habits like another thing with Killy is kids, I'll send out a contract. They can't take the elevator at school. So
Interesting.
no more elevators. Like you have to walk to your classes and we're going to hold you accountable for that. We're going to ensure that, we'll have students take pictures of themselves doing these things and like send it to a WhatsApp group or an email or something like that. And then the other kids who are copied on this email see what their buddies are doing and they're able to say, okay, this is an objective, a project that is much larger than just myself. Like I'm a team member. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
not following by this code of conduct, by this environment that's being set around this objective, I'm going to be the odd man out. I don't want to be the odd man out. I signed up for this to become ultimately a better person. I signed up for this to transform my life. And so if I'm going to fully commit to this, then I have to do all these little things right that might often get overlooked. And, we're doing Kilimanjaro this year, we did it last year as well as, last year after that Kilimanjaro trip, we had a mix of high school and college students who are still actively, a year has gone by, they're from all over the country, and they're still actively in contact with another, and they're still actively building upon some of these habits that they
Mm-hmm.
um, learned through the process of going to Kilimanjaro. You know, I have a number of students who are from the Newark area, where again, the outdoors are often an afterthought, but I've introduced them to hiking trails that are within a 30-minute drive, going to Palisades State Park, which is beautiful, right on the Hudson River. And, again, talking about like habits in the process, like these students and their families are now identifying these parks that are within 30 to 25 minutes where they can go on a Saturday and a Sunday. And again, you begin to appreciate your environment so much more. Um, when we go to Kilimanjaro, the highlight of going to a place like Kilimanjaro is interacting with the porters, these life-loving, joy-filled men and women who carry extreme amounts of weight up this 19,000 foot plus mountain. And whether you're 15 or 50, when you're on this mountain, you see how hard these folks work.
Yeah.
We go up Kilimanjaro, there is a porter who carries a toilet over the course of 7 days that is used by a public group. He or she cleans it out every single day. They're putting this toilet on their back. And when you see that, it's what you can't watch a YouTube video or listen to a podcast on this. When you see that, you take that with you forever. Like when you come back home and you think about your day to day in the first world nation and how difficult things really are, and you see something like that, your whole worldview has changed.
Yeah.
And, that cultivates feelings of empathy, that creates a worldview that empowers you to be grateful for where you are and all the things that you have in your life. It reframes your understanding of difficult and challenge and work. When you see a 40-year-old porter who is, you know, carrying a toilet up a mountain or carrying a ton of food, or some of these guys will carry buckets of water that they have to boil from the rivers. And this is an immense amount of weight that they're carrying. Sometimes it's half their body weight. When you see that and experience that, it totally reframes your worldview. And I think all of that process of, let's say, 6 months before a trip like Kilimanjaro, on a trip like Kilimanjaro, it's almost impossible to not be literally transformed.
Yeah. Well, I love that because it gives kids the opportunity to look out into the future and think, what do I need to be doing now to be able to do that thing in the future? But then what I also liked about that is that, okay, you can't plan a trip and go to Kilimanjaro every week, but once you do something transformative like that, then it changes the way that you do your day to day. And like you said, you start to look around for other opportunities to do different things in your area that could be something you can do a couple hours on the weekend, like you said, the national parks that are near you. That's actually something that my husband and I started doing. Like when we travel, we always think, are there any trails or state parks or national parks near us that we can hit while we're doing our traveling? So that's kind of again, like we had a longer trip that we planned, and then it put it on our radar. You start to pay attention to things when you have an awareness of things. The other
Yes.
thing, I mean, I could see how you could take that same concept and apply it to things that don't require you to travel really far. Like you have a child who wants to sign up for a travel sport, which is a big uh, just time and financial commitment for families, but maybe they have to practice their sport or do something for a period of time before they can show I'm ready to be committed to this. So something like that. I can see lots of opportunities where you could take that same concept and apply it to other things that you're doing in your day-to-day life, even just in the local activities that you're doing, where kids have to show, I'm going to work for this, I'm going to earn this thing that is an opportunity that I'm really lucky to be able to have, because a lot of other people might not be in a situation where they can do it for whatever reason. And so I think on that topic, it would be really interesting to hear about the fundraising that you've been doing. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear
So
about that.
this is the most difficult piece is fundraising. And I mean the big dream for Mountain Goat or something like this would, and this is going to sound a little crazy, would be to get to the point where this is kind of like public education,
Yeah.
where it's funded and students of every different background can participate on these domestic and international programs. Um, so with Mountain Goat, I'm a one-man team, and so the bulk of my time is like trip implementation, working with schools. My superpower is interfacing with students and making these trips meaningful. But so much of my time is dedicated towards fundraising, and I have to take a very creative approach for this to happen. So what has worked relatively well, it's still a growing pain, is I've formalized partnerships with primarily outdoor brands. So right now, our number one partner is Cavu. They make outdoor wear. They're headquartered in Seattle. Grail, they're a water bottle and water filter company. Um, Arc'teryx here in New York. Um, Eastern Mountain Sports. And so what I'll do is I'll pitch to these brands, um, a particular amount of money, and then those funds will support students of disadvantaged and low income backgrounds to participate on these trips and events. In exchange for these brands, I'll provide, meaningful content, short and long form. So, for example, for the Hudson River trip, we had to raise $100,000, which we were able to successfully do over a few months, and it was a really daunting task. It was probably the most difficult piece to all of this. And so that means months of cold calling, emails, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the little projects that I've done where I'll do a personal expedition and look to raise funds through, me advocating the importance of these programs has worked well. Um, what would be really meaningful for Mountain Goat, and for students is to connect with folks maybe in these larger corporate spaces like the health and wellness industry, um,
Mm-hmm.
or the education space, where people can find enough value in what we're doing to put up larger chunks of change to really sponsor groups in full. Um, One of the pieces that I'm going to be working on upcoming is connecting with like boards of education, in particular regions, to, and especially for public schools, is to make these things embedded in public school curriculum. So, for example, like if we are looking at, let's say, Newark Board of Ed, where the outdoors aren't as ubiquitous as being in like Denver. But with
Mm-hmm.
Newark Board of Ed, what we could do is go into the school and teach critical life skills, which I think are often overlooked. So, for example, I would advocate that I think every young person should know how to give CPR or use an AED,
Yeah.
like or critical life skills, or
Mm-hmm.
one of the we'll do like a wilderness first responder course where students have to solve a problem with the resources that the limited resources that are around them. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
can you use a rain jacket and use it as a splint or a means to help someone with a broken arm? And
Yeah.
so, getting students to think creatively about these things. But I think a lot of these critical life skills should be valued enough by larger corporations, and school systems, where then we can allocate funds for students of every different background to experience these meaningful programs.
I think that, it's I like that you're thinking about all these different angles because a lot of times the people in the schools they want to be able to do this. They're just so overloaded and they feel like they're this catch-all agency that has to do everything. So pulling from these other resources and creating partnerships is really important because I mean the funding aspect is huge. That's something that I know that when you are working directly with students, it's not about that, but there's so many back end operations that need to happen. So I think it's important for people who understand education to be involved in those kinds of decisions because it just there's so many different layers and you get so far removed and when funds are put in different places and different buckets it's hard to know where to put things
Yeah,
so yeah and
yeah,
and I
I
do
think that.
think oh sorry go ahead.
Right. No, I think this is, and I'm really glad that we're talking about this because it can be very frustrating, I think, for a lot of educators when you see all these companies and larger entities talking about the importance of like inclusivity and accessibility. And then what I've learned through like the Mountain Goat experience is, it's really hard to find folks who put their money where their mouth is, simply put. Like it's really hard to find these large entities who, preach this idea of inclusivity, accessibility, student empowerment. And then it's like when you're boots on the ground, grassroots, doing this good work, and you have the skills, you have the student engagement. You have great teachers. All you need is money. That should not burden all of these programs. That should be, and every grassroots organization that's doing good work struggles with this, is like oftentimes the biggest hurdle is money, and that shouldn't be the case. Like, 9 out of 10 people walking down the street see that we're living in a fractured community. Most people see that we've become tech obsessed. People
Mm-hmm.
see that young people need meaning and empowerment, perhaps now more than ever. We see all these things. Yet, why can't we as a common collective begin to solve these issues? Like, it's a total disservice to young people to think that now in a lot of our communities, this is acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of siloing happening. I remember one time a colleague of mine sent me something and it was like some big AI research project that was being done at the university and they were talking about the amount of funding. It was like, we just got all this funding to do this big project. And he was like, what do you think about this? And my first instinct was people who are in public education aren't going to like it because they're seeing all this money going towards this other project that feels removed from them.
Mm,
And people don't always, it's really confusing to understand where funds are pulled for different sources. And so even if that money might not be being pulled from the same funding source that they're using, people don't like to see, like, we have limited resources over here and then there's this other place that has this abundance of resources and we're getting left out of it. And I think it's just like it's
yeah,
really confusing how all of that works. And so I think that it's a lot of like there's not a lot of glue that holds it all together and people get in their own little silos, as I said, and with the leadership and what they say versus what they do. I mean, I think there are people issues and there are systems issues, and when you isolate the people from the systems, I think that 99% of people have good intentions and really believe that they believe in what they're saying and they want to follow what they're saying, but sometimes there's some systemic things that are holding things back and those unfortunately take a
yeah,
long time to fix. So
yeah.
I yeah, but
That's
also as you were saying before about the Hudson River project, where how you're saying it's so healthy because of these efforts that people have done, I think that's a really important for students as well, because I think that they're with the systemic issues, there's this polarizing view. It happens a lot on social media where it's like everything is broken, it can't be fixed, and that makes it feel impossible. We don't understand those small wins that get us in the right direction. And when you see things like that where it's, hey, I know that there are a lot of issues affecting our environment that have to do with a lot of things that would take a long time to change, but look at what happens. You can make a difference, and here's evidence of that. So I think there's a lot to that conversation, but yeah, I'm excited to hear that you're working on that.
Yes, yes. No, you said it perfectly. Like, it's a systems issue.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, maybe a side tangent, but last year we had a group of high school students. We went to Switzerland, and what's really interesting about Switzerland is a lot of these programs are funded, and I think like with Swiss tourism, even 50% of like tour operators in Switzerland are funded by the government, and then the other 50% comes from commission. So like if you have a COVID, for example, like people aren't out of work, like things can keep moving in some sense. But my point is like, Switzerland, of course, this place that has outdoor beauty and is abundant, and you need critical skills to like live and flourish in this environment. Like this is a part of a lot of school programs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I still think like you could go to a place like a city or an inner city and teach these skills, because there's the natural world is abundant around us wherever we might be. One of the explorers that we connected with, his name's Les Medley. He's been tracking coyotes in Central Park, and it's
Oh,
like to check
wow.
that in. Yeah, so cool.
We have
Like I didn't know.
coyotes here too, so
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I didn't know about this at all, and for students in the Upper West Side to hear about what's going on, and like, they're in school all day, every day, listening to the importance of like stewardship and taking care of the environment. But it's one thing to listen to that, and that's another thing to go to Central Park and actually see, wow, there are coyotes running around in Central Park, and how do we make sense of this? Why do we have to protect an area like Central Park or like my street? And it's those
Hmm.
touch points that on a localized scale and ultimately a national scale are going to unify perhaps systems around
Hmm.
environmental care and global empathy and stewardship.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to be involved because if you're not involved, it feels like nothing's changing. You don't see the small wins and the steps to get there. And the habits versus the results, I think that's important with a lot of these things we've been talking about today, where you don't get to summit the largest peak in, wherever every day,
Mm.
but you can do some work that's going to prepare you for doing something like that every day. And you can at least check that off your list and feel like you got there. So I think
Yes,
that's not just important for the kids, but for the adults as well, because I know that people are feeling frustrated. But
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. That's a
So, where can people go to learn more about you and what you do? And yeah, all the great things that you've been sharing today.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'd like to say that, community mountain goat movement is by the community for the community. Um, We have a website, mountaingoatmovement.com, Instagram, YouTube, all Mountain Goat Movement. You could reach out and learn more by emailing mountaingoatmovement@gmail.com. I'm a one-man team currently, no funding. This is all totally grassroots and bootstrap. So I'm, very motivated to continue to find good educators and explorers and folks who can really help build out these meaningful programs for young people. We're continuing to formalize more school partnerships at the high school and university level. So I'm really excited with what we can build as a community and try to find these localized and international spaces for students to thrive and basically supplement all the good work that all these great teachers are doing in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, we'll link to all of those things. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
being here with me today.
Thank you very much for having me on, Karen. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all of the places you can go to connect with Greg and learn more about the work he's doing, as well as learn about some episodes of the De Facto Leaders podcast that would be a great supplement to this conversation, including episode 123, Creating Equitable Systems for K-12 Math with Jonathan Regino, episode 144, Becoming a School Founder and Empowering Students Through Project-Based Learning with Tanya Sheckley, the bonus episode on accessible career exploration in K-12 education with Matthew Chaucy, and episode 158, Literacy and Background Knowledge, Essential Skills for Life with Dr. Pamela Snow. And also, be sure to check out the B Podcast Network for educators and aspiring school leaders. You can learn more about the B Podcast Network at bpodcastnetwork.com. If you have a suggestion for a guest, or if you're interested in being a guest on De Facto Leaders, please send me an email at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. As always, it helps me out so much if you leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And as always, if you found this episode useful, feel free to share it with your friends. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.